The sun hung bright in the sky as 16-year-old Zoe Wilson checked the address on her phone one more time. A gentle breeze blew through her braids as she stood at the edge of a neighborhood she'd only seen in movies. Beverly Hills. The houses, no, mansions, stretched out before her, each one bigger than the community center back in her South LA neighborhood. Zoe shifted her backpack strap nervously. She wasn't supposed to be here, at least that's what it felt like. Her mom had worked extra cleaning shifts this month just to buy Zoe the new shoes she wore today. She didn't want to embarrass herself. "Just get through this project," she whispered to herself as she walked up to the biggest house on the block. 3 hours, then you can go home. When her science teacher paired her with Alex Chen for their chemistry project last week, Zoe had groaned inside. Everyone knew Alex's family owned half the shopping centers in LA. He drove a car that cost more than her mom made in 2 years. They lived in different worlds. And now she had to enter his. Zoe pressed the doorbell and heard musical chimes echo inside. A moment later, a woman in what looked like a uniform opened the door. "You must be Alexandria's project partner," the woman said with a slight accent. "Please come in. He'll be down shortly." Zoe stepped into the entrance hall and nearly gasped. The ceiling soared 2 stories high with a crystal chandelier that sparkled in the afternoon light. The floor beneath her feet was some kind of polished stone that made her new shoes look suddenly cheap. "You can wait in here," the woman said, gesturing to a room off to the side. "Would you like something to drink?" "No, thank you," Zoe replied, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. The woman nodded and disappeared down a hallway, leaving Zoe alone. She stepped into what must have been some kind of sitting room, with fancy couches and paintings in gold frames on the walls. But what caught her eye immediately was the piano. It stood in the corner by floor-to-ceiling windows, black and gleaming in the sunlight. Not just any piano, a grand piano with the lid propped open. Zoe walked toward it like she was being pulled by a magnet. Since she was 5 years old, music had been Zoe's escape. Her grandma had taught her on their old upright piano, the one with 3 broken keys and a sticky pedal. When Grandma Rose passed away 3 years ago, Zoe had lost not just her teacher, but also regular access to a piano. Now she practiced whenever she could, during lunch break at school, at church when nobody was around, or at the community center when they'd let her. Standing before this magnificent instrument, Zoe couldn't help herself. She reached out and touched one key so gently that it didn't make a sound. The smooth ivory felt cool under her fingertip. She ran her hand lightly across the keys, not pressing down, just feeling their perfect weight. "What do you think you're doing?" The sharp voice cut through the quiet room like a knife. Zoe spun around to see a tall woman with perfectly styled hair and a string of pearls around her neck. Alex's mother. Her eyes were cold as they looked Zoe up and down, lingering on her braids, her jeans, her backpack. "I'm sorry, Zoe started to explain, but the woman cut her off. "That's a Steinway concert grand piano. It costs more than most people's homes." Her voice dripped with disapproval. "It's not a toy for just anyone to touch." Zoe stepped back from the piano, her face burning with shame. She hadn't even played a note. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I play piano, and I've never seen one so beautiful." A laugh came from the doorway where 3 more people had gathered. An older couple and a girl about Zoe's age but dressed like she was heading to a fancy dinner. The girl whispered something to the older woman, who covered her mouth and laughed again. "You play piano?" Alex's mother said, raising one eyebrow so high it disappeared under her bangs. The way she said it made it clear she didn't believe Zoe for a second. "Where exactly do you take lessons? The community center?" The older man in the doorway chuckled. "Darling, be nice. I'm sure she's played chopsticks once or twice." Zoe felt like she'd shrunk to half her size. She wanted to disappear, to run out the front door and never come back. The chemistry project wasn't worth this. Nothing was worth this feeling. The girl in the doorway pulled out her phone and held it up like she might start recording if anything interesting happened. "Auntie Lisa, maybe she can play us a little something," she said with a smirk. "I'd love to hear what they're teaching in South LA these days." Zoe's chest felt tight, and her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She'd promised herself long ago that she would never cry in front of people who looked down on her. Her grandma had taught her better than that. "I should wait outside," Zoe said quietly, trying to edge toward the door, but the small crowd blocked her path. "What's going on?" A boy's voice came from behind the group. They parted to reveal Alex, looking confused as he took in the scene. Zoe standing by the piano, his mother's disapproving stare, his relatives clearly enjoying the show. "Your friend here was about to give us a concert," his cousin said with a laugh, "on Uncle James's precious piano." Alex looked at Zoe, then at his mother. "Mom, this is Zoe, my lab partner." "Well, she needs to understand boundaries," his mother replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "Some things aren't meant for everyone to touch." The room fell silent. Zoe could feel everyone watching her, waiting for her to break down or run away. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she balled them into fists to stop the shaking. She felt like she was balanced on the edge of a cliff. She could step back, apologize again, and wait outside like she'd planned. The safe choice, or she could jump. Memories flashed through her mind, her grandma's hands guiding hers over piano keys, staying late after school to practice until her fingers ached, the feeling of peace that washed over her when she played. Music had been her shelter when her dad left, when they had to move to a smaller apartment when her grandma passed. Nobody could take that away from her, not even these people with their perfect clothes and cruel smiles. "Actually," Zoe said, her voice quiet but clear, "I've been playing piano for 11 years. Alex's mother let out a small huff, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The older man crossed his arms and the girl with the phone snickered. "My grandma taught me," Zoe continued, drawing strength from those words. "She played for church and taught lessons to kids in our neighborhood." "How nice," Alex's mother said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "A family tradition." Zoe looked directly at her then. Something shifted inside her, a quiet strength taking root where the embarrassment had been. "Would it be all right if I played something? Just one piece?" The request hung in the air. Alex looked surprised, glancing between Zoe and his mother. "You want to play our piano?" Alex's mother asked, her eyebrows nearly reaching her hairline. The older man chuckled. "Oh, let her try, Lisa. This might be amusing." Zoe felt her cheeks burn again, but this time with determination rather than shame. She turned to Alex. "Would that be okay with you? It's your house, too." Alex seemed caught off guard by being addressed directly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, sure. Why not?" His mother shot him a look that could have frozen water. "Alexander, this isn't some public piano at the mall. Your father had this imported from Germany." "It's just sitting there, Mom," Alex said with a shrug. "Besides, we're supposed to be working on our chemistry project, not whatever this is." "I promise I'll be careful," Zoe said. "My hands are clean." She held them up as proof, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. The group by the doorway had grown. A man in a suit had joined them, probably Alex's father. He looked confused by the tension in the room. "What's happening here?" he asked. "Zoe wants to play the piano, Dad," Alex explained before his mother could answer. "She says she's been playing for 11 years, his mother added with an eye roll that made it clear what she thought of that claim. Alex's father looked at Zoe with mild curiosity. "Where do you study?" "I don't take formal lessons, sir," Zoe admitted. "Not anymore. My grandma taught me until she passed away 3 years ago. Now I mostly practice at school during lunch breaks or whenever I can find a piano." She could see, in their faces, that this confession only confirmed what they already thought, that she was out of her league, a girl from the wrong side of town pretending to have talent. The girl with the phone, Alex's cousin, Zoe guessed, had started recording. "This is going to be good," she whispered to the older woman beside her, not bothering to lower her voice. Zoe felt a flash of panic. There would be evidence of whatever happened next. If she messed up, if her fingers froze from nerves, they'd have it all on video. Maybe they'd share it online, maybe kids at school would see it. For a second, she almost backed down. But then she caught Alex watching her with a strange expression. not mocking like the others, but almost curious, like he wanted to see what would happen too. "One piece," Alex's mother finally said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Then, you two need to get to work. Alexander has tennis practice at 5. Zoe swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." She approached the piano again, this time with purpose. The bench was polished wood, smooth against the back of her legs as she sat down. The keys gleamed, perfectly even and unmarked by years of use like the old piano at school. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, taking a slow, deep breath, like her grandma had taught her. "Stage fright already?" Alex's cousin whispered loudly. Zoe didn't respond. She closed her eyes briefly, picturing her grandma's face, remembering what she always said before Zoe performed at church. "Play from your heart, baby girl. That's where the real music lives." When she opened her eyes again, the fancy room, the judging faces, the phone recording her, they all faded away. There was only the piano now. Her fingers hovered over the keys, finding their home position. From muscle memory, she could feel Alex's mother watching, waiting for her to embarrass herself with chopsticks or Heart and Soul, the simple tunes everyone knew. The older man had already turned away, losing interest before she'd even started. "What are you going to play?" Alex asked, stepping closer to the piano. Zoe looked up at him. For the first time since arriving at this house, she felt a small smile form on her lips. "Chopin," she said simply. "Ballade No. 1 in G minor." The older man turned back, eyebrows raised. "Chopin?" Alex's mother repeated, unable to hide her surprise. "That's rather ambitious." Zoe didn't reply. She took one more deep breath, positioned her fingers over the keys, and began to play. The first notes filled the room, gentle and questioning. Zoe's fingers pressed the keys with a delicate touch, like she was asking permission from the piano itself. The opening melody of Chopin's ballade floated into the air, soft, almost shy, but with a hint of something deeper waiting beneath the surface. Alex's cousin lowered her phone slightly, her smirk fading. The older couple exchanged glances. No one had expected this, not Mary had a little lamb or a fumbling attempt at Für Elise, but this complex piece that even seasoned pianists approached with caution. Zoe kept her eyes on the keys, letting her fingers find their way across the familiar pattern. This piano responded to her lightest touch, unlike the stubborn school piano that needed firm pressure to sound a note. The tone was rich and clear, each note ringing true in a way she'd never experienced before. It felt like discovering a new color after years of seeing in shades of gray. As the piece progressed, Zoe began to forget where she was. The fear and embarrassment that had knotted her stomach moments ago melted away. Her shoulders relaxed, and her breathing deepened. This was her world now, the rise and fall of the melody, the conversation between her hands as they moved across the keyboard. The piece began to build, growing more complex with each measure. Her left hand rolled through arpeggios while her right hand sang out the melody. When she reached the first difficult run, her fingers danced up the keyboard in a blur, hitting each note with precision born from thousands of hours of practice. Alex had moved closer to the piano, watching Zoe's hands with a look of stunned disbelief. His mother stood frozen, the dismissive smile wiped clean from her face. The older man, who Zoe now realized must be Alex's grandfather, had stepped fully into the room, his eyes wide and fixed on her hands. Zoe felt the music building inside her, the tension and release that made Chopin's work so powerful. This wasn't just playing notes on a page. This was telling a story. Her grandma had always said music was a language of its own, speaking directly to the heart in a way words never could. As the piece reached its first dramatic climax, Zoe's body swayed slightly with the music. Her fingers struck the keys with newfound confidence, drawing out thunderous chords that filled the high-ceilinged room. Her foot worked the pedal instinctively, binding the notes together into a river of sound. More people had gathered in the doorway, the woman who had opened the front door, a man in a gardener's clothes, another teenager who must have been Alex's brother. They stood silently, watching and listening as this girl they had never seen before transformed before their eyes, from an awkward visitor into something else entirely, an artist, lost in her craft. When the music shifted again, becoming introspective and almost mournful, Zoe felt her grandmother's presence so strongly that tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away, focusing on the keys. This section always reminded her of rain, gentle at first, then growing into a storm. Her fingers moved faster, building the intensity note by note. Alex's cousin had forgotten to keep recording. The phone hung limply in her hand as she stared, mouth slightly open. Alex's mother had sunk into a nearby chair, her perfectly composed, expression cracked wide open. No one whispered now. No one laughed. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun cast golden light across the piano in Zoe's hands. Dust motes danced in the beams, swirling with the vibrations of the music. For these moments, the divisions between them all, wealth and poverty, privilege and struggle, seemed to dissolve into nothing. As she approached the most technically challenging section of the piece, Zoe took a quick breath. This was where she sometimes stumbled during practice, where the notes came so fast and furious that her fingers could barely keep up. But today, on this magnificent instrument, something magical happened. Her hands seemed to know exactly what to do, finding each key without hesitation or error. The music poured from her fingers in waves, cresting and breaking, pulling everyone in the room along with its tide. Alex's grandfather had tears in his eyes now, one hand pressed against his chest as if to contain his heart. Even Alex's mother looked shaken, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the arms of her chair. When Zoe reached the final thundering section of the piece, she gave herself over to it completely. Her whole body was part of the performance now, her shoulders rising with the crescendos, her head bowing with the softer passages. The years of playing on inferior instruments, of practicing whenever and wherever she could, had prepared her for this moment. She wasn't just playing Chopin, she was channeling him, bringing his centuries-old emotions to life in this room of strangers. The final notes, powerful, defiant, and then suddenly, achingly tender, lingered in the air. Zoe's hands finally stilled on the keys, the last chord fading slowly into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The room remained in perfect stillness, as if everyone was afraid to break the spell that had fallen over them. Zoe slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard and placed them in her lap. She took a deep breath and raised her eyes, finally looking at the faces around her. Alex stood closest to the piano, his mouth open in shock. His cousin had completely lowered her phone, having forgotten to record half the performance. The older couple by the door were holding hands, the woman dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Alex's mother sat perfectly still in her chair, her expression unreadable but utterly transformed. It was Alex's father who moved first. He stepped forward, his expensive shoes quiet on the marble floor. "Young lady," he said, his voice oddly hoarse, "where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Zoe looked up at Alex's father, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. The bubble of music that had protected her had popped, and reality came rushing back. She was still in this massive house, still the outsider, still the girl from South LA who didn't belong. She started, her voice catching slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again. "My grandma taught me. She played at our church and gave lessons." "And where did your grandmother study?" Alex's grandfather asked, stepping closer. His voice was gentle now, nothing like the mocking tone from earlier. "She didn't, not formally," Zoe explained, her hands still resting in her lap. "She learned from her mother, who played in churches too. They couldn't afford music school back then." Alex's mother had finally found her voice. "You're telling us you played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, without formal training?" The disbelief was still there, but mixed with something new, something that looked almost like respect. "Yes, ma'am," Zoe said simply. She didn't know what else to add. She couldn't explain how the music lived inside her, how her fingers seemed to know the keys better than they knew anything else in the world. "That's extraordinary," Alex's father said. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its perfect styling. Genuinely extraordinary. The older woman, Alex's grandmother, had moved to stand beside the piano. What else can you play, dear? She asked, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Lots of things, Zoe said with a small shrug. Bach, Beethoven, some Liszt. I like Chopin, best though. And gospel, of course, for church. Alex had been silent this whole time, staring at Zoe like he was seeing her for the first time. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you tell me? Zoe looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since they'd been paired for the project. You never asked, she said simply. A flash of shame crossed his face. He'd spent a week sitting next to her in chemistry class, making small talk about the assignment, never once wondering about her life outside school. Do you have a piano at home? Alex's grandfather asked. Zoe shook her head. We had to sell my grandma's after she passed. Medical bills, you know, I practice at school, during lunch and after classes when they let me stay. A heavy silence followed her words. The contrast was impossible to ignore. This family with their Steinway grand piano that no one played, and Zoe with all her talent and no instrument of her own. That's why your fingers are so calloused, Alex's mother said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. I noticed when you first came in, your fingertips. She held up her own perfectly manicured hands as if for comparison. Zoe nodded. Yes, ma'am. The school piano is pretty old. The keys are stiffer than this one. And yet you play like that, Alex's father said, shaking his head in amazement. He turned to his wife. Lisa, isn't your brother David on the board at the conservatory? Lisa, no longer just Alex's mother, but a person with a name and a shifting expression, nodded slowly. Yes, he oversees the scholarship committee. Uncle David? Alex asked, picking up on his father's tone. You think he should hear Zoe play? I think he'd be very interested, his father replied. Zoe's heart skipped a beat. The conservatory. Everyone knew about the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music. Getting in was nearly impossible unless you were rich or incredibly well-connected, or occasionally exceptionally talented. Oh, I don't know about that, Zoe said quickly, suddenly nervous again. I just play what my grandma taught me. I don't read music all that well, and my technique probably isn't right. Nonsense, Alex's grandfather interrupted. He waved a hand toward the piano. What you just did wasn't about technique or reading notes, that was artistry. Alex's cousin, who had been unusually quiet since the performance, suddenly spoke up. I got some of it, she said, holding up her phone. Do you want to see? Without waiting for an answer, she came forward and held out her phone. On the screen, Zoe saw herself at the piano, caught in profile as her hands moved across the keys. Her face was transformed, peaceful and passionate all at once. She barely recognized herself. I've never heard anyone play like that, the cousin admitted, her earlier mockery completely gone. Not even at the Philharmonic concerts we go to. Alex's grandmother patted Zoe's shoulder. You have a gift, my dear, a true gift. Zoe felt her eyes filling with tears. She blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of these people, even if the tears would be happy ones this time. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd like to call my brother, Lisa said suddenly, reaching for her phone. Now, before you leave, would that be all right? Zoe nodded, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Just 20 minutes ago, these people had been laughing at her, making her feel small and worthless. Now they were making phone calls and talking about scholarships. While Mom does that, Alex said, we should probably get started on our project. He gestured toward his backpack, which he'd dropped by the door. But maybe after. Would you play something else? The request was hesitant, almost shy. The arrogant rich boy from chemistry class had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely interested. Sure, Zoe agreed. I'd like that. As they moved to gather their school things, the housekeeper who had opened the door reappeared, with a tray of snacks and drinks. She smiled warmly at Zoe. "That was beautiful, miss," she said softly. "Reminded me of home." "Where's home?" Zoe asked. "Philippines," the woman replied. "My mother played too. Not like you, but she loved music." It struck Zoe then that music really was a universal language, crossing boundaries of all kinds. In the space of one piece, she had gone from being an unwelcome guest to someone these people wanted to know better. All because she had found the courage to share her gift instead of hiding it away. Lisa returned, her phone call finished. "David's very interested," she said, looking at Zoe with new eyes. "He asked if you could come to the conservatory next Saturday for an informal audition. Nothing official, just to meet some of the faculty." Zoe's mouth went dry. I'd have to ask my mom. She works Saturdays, so I'd need to figure out how to get there." "We'll drive you," Alex's father said immediately. "And your mother too, if she'd like to come." Alex smiled at Zoe, a real smile this time. "Maybe we can practice our presentation in the car." Zoe couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Sure," she said. "Chemistry in the car, piano, at the conservatory. Just a normal Saturday." And as everyone chuckled around her, Zoe felt something new bloom in her chest. Not just pride in her music, but a sense that maybe, just maybe, doors were opening that she'd never even dared to knock on before. A month later, Zoe sat on a hard plastic chair in the hallway of the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The walls around her were covered with photos of famous musicians who had studied here, their faces serious and important-looking in their black and white portraits. Her mom sat beside her, dressed in her good church clothes, even though it was a Saturday. She reached over and stilled Zoe's fidgeting hands. "Baby, you need to calm down. Your hand's going to be too shaky to play if you keep this up." Zoe took a deep breath. "What if they change their minds?" she whispered. "What if they don't think I'm good enough after all?" Her mom squeezed her hand. "Then we go home and keep on living our lives just like before, but that's not going to happen. You got this far, didn't you?" The past month had been like a dream. After that first day at Alex's house, everything had changed. Their chemistry project ended up getting an A+, but that was the least of it. Alex's uncle David had arranged for Zoe to play for the directors of the conservatory's pre-college program. They had been impressed enough to invite her back for a formal audition, which she had just completed 30 minutes ago. Now they were waiting to hear the decision. The door at the end of the hallway opened and Alex appeared with 2 cups of hot chocolate. He had insisted on coming today for moral support. Despite having a tennis tournament he was missing, his parents had dropped him off before heading to watch his brother's game, promising to return in time to hear the verdict. "They're still talking." "In there," Alex said, handing Zoe one of the cups. "But I heard someone say extraordinary when I walked past." Zoe's mom smiled at him. In the past month, she had gone from being suspicious of this rich boy to genuinely liking him. He had come to their apartment twice to work on the project, never showing a hint of judgment about their small living space or the neighborhood. "Thanks for being here, Alex," Zoe's mom said. "It means a lot to both of us." Alex shrugged. "Are you kidding? This is way more important than tennis. Besides, I told Zoe I'd be here and I keep my promises." That was another change. The arrogant boy from chemistry class had revealed himself to be someone different, still privileged and sometimes clueless about real-world struggles, but also kind and surprisingly thoughtful once you got to know him. Zoe sipped her hot chocolate. "Your parents are coming back?" "Yeah," Alex said, checking his phone. "Dad's bringing Uncle David too, and—" He hesitated, looking slightly embarrassed. "My mom wants to talk to your mom about something." Before Zoe could ask what that meant, the door to the audition room opened. An older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes stepped out, followed by 2 men in suits. Zoe recognized them as the panel who had listened to her play. She gripped her mom's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Miss Wilson?" the woman said, looking at Zoe's mom. "Could you and Zoe join us, please?" Zoe stood on shaky legs. Alex gave her a thumbs up as she and her mom followed the woman back into the audition room. The grand piano still stood in the center, its lid propped open like a giant black wing. "Please sit down," one of the men said, gesturing to chairs arranged near the piano. Zoe and her mom sat side by side. Zoe folded her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. The silver-haired woman spoke first. "Ms. Wilson, your daughter has a remarkable gift. In my 30 years at this institution, I've rarely heard someone with her natural musicality." Zoe's mom nodded, her face serious. Her grandma always said she had music in her soul. "Your mother was absolutely right," the woman continued, looking at Zoe now. "What you lack in formal training, you make up for with instinct and emotional depth. However, there are technical aspects of your playing that need refinement." Zoe's heart sank. This sounded like a rejection coming. That said, one of the men took over. "We would like to offer Zoe a place in our pre-college program, with a full scholarship." For a moment, Zoe thought she had misheard. She looked at her mom, whose eyes had filled with tears. "A full scholarship?" her mom repeated. "Yes," the man confirmed. "Tuition, materials, and private lessons with Professor Yamamoto, one of our most distinguished faculty members." The silver-haired woman, Professor Yamamoto herself, Zoe realized, nodded. "It will be intense work. You'll need to unlearn some habits and build new ones. There will be theory classes, ear training, music history. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment?" Zoe nodded, still too stunned to speak. "There's also the matter of practice," the second man said. "Students
need access to a piano daily. Do you have one at home?"
Before either Zoe or her mom could answer, there was a knock at the door. Alex poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but my parents are here, and they were wondering if they could join you." The panel members exchanged glances, then nodded. Alex opened the door wider and his parents entered, followed by his Uncle David and, surprisingly, his grandparents. Lisa, Alex's mother, stepped forward. "We don't mean to intrude, but David told us Zoe was getting her results today, and we wanted to be here." She looked different than she had that first day. Softer, somehow. Her perfect appearance relaxed. Slightly. "We were just discussing the need for Zoe to have a piano at home for practice," Professor Yamamoto explained. "Actually," Lisa said, "that's part of why we're here." She turned to Zoe's mom. "Mrs. Wilson, we've been thinking, our piano at home sits unused most of the time. We'd like to donate a piano to your family." Zoe's mom stiffened slightly. "That's very generous, but we couldn't accept such an expensive gift." Lisa shook her head. "Not our Steinway. We thought perhaps a good upright that would fit in your apartment, a practice instrument for Zoe." "We'd like to do this," Alex's father added. "Music like Zoe's shouldn't be silenced for lack of an instrument." Zoe's mom looked torn between pride and practicality. "I don't know. Think of it as an investment in our community's future," Lisa said softly. "Who knows how many people Zoe's music will touch one day?" Alex's grandfather spoke up. "I've already picked one out. It's being delivered next week, if that's all right. Nothing too fancy, but good tone and touch." Zoe could hardly believe what she was hearing. A scholarship, lessons with a renowned teacher, and now a piano of her own. It was too much to take in. "There's one more thing," Uncle David said. "The Philharmonic has a youth showcase concert each spring. We'd like Zoe to consider performing." The room fell silent. Zoe looked around at all these faces, her mom fighting back tears of joy, Alex grinning from ear to ear, his family so different now from the people who had first greeted her with mockery, and the conservatory panel waiting for her answer. "I'd be honored," she said finally, her voice stronger than she expected. "Thank you. All of you." As they left the building a little while later, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, Zoe felt like she was walking in a dream. Alex fell into step beside her. "So you're going to be famous now," he teased. "Don't forget about us little people." Zoe laughed. "You're literally 6 inches taller than me." "You know what I mean," he said, suddenly serious. "I'm really happy for you." "Zoe," she nodded, looking back at the conservatory building. "It's crazy how one moment can change everything, isn't it? If I hadn't touched that piano that day, if my mom hadn't been so awful, Alex added with a grimace. If I hadn't found the courage to ask to play, Zoe continued. Her mom, walking ahead with Alex's parents, turned back. You coming? They're taking us to dinner to celebrate. Zoe smiled. Life's funny sometimes, she said to Alex as they hurried to catch up. A month ago, I was just the girl from South LA who didn't belong in your world. Now look at us. Maybe the worlds weren't as far apart as we thought, Alex suggested. Maybe we just needed the right bridge. Music, Zoe said with a nod. My grandma always said it was the universal language. As they joined their families, Zoe felt a sense of peace wash over her. Her grandma would have loved this moment, not just because of the scholarship or the piano, but because her granddaughter had been brave enough to share her gift with the world. That was the real victory, the real shock that had left everyone speechless that day in Alex's living room. Not just that a girl from South LA could play Chopin, but that she could play it with her whole heart, reminding everyone who heard her that beauty exists everywhere, just waiting for its chance to shine.